The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 16. Lars rolled the dagger over in his hands as he studied it closely. "So we still have no idea who this belongs to," he said. Trent, the ship's AI, shook his head. "Its identity and origin are unknown. Even so, I detected trace evidence of human DNA on the blade and handle, as well as over 4,000 other trace patterns, none of which can be definitively linked to any specific species," he said. Lars sighed. "I wish I could make sense of this. If we could just get a clear picture of who made it, we might be able to figure out who attacked me. Trent, display for me a list of all known humanoid species." A holographic screen appeared in front of him with a listing of over 500 names. Lars pursed his lips in annoyance as he tossed the dagger on the table. "Okay, let's trim this down a bit. Show me only the species that are most closely related to humans." The list shrank to 78 entries. Lars groaned in frustration. This was getting him nowhere. So he thought further. Separate the species by similarity. The display changed to show 12 groups. "Now show me a picture of a representative species from each group." 12 pictures appeared on the display. Lars immediately touched 2 of the images and gave them a gentle push off the screen. "Nope, not them." He studied the others and then removed 5 more. "All right, how many do we have left?" 7 groups totaling 25 species, replied Trent. "Gah, still too many. We need to break this down a bit more." Trent, separate out the remaining species by similarity again, being a bit more specific this time, and then display representative species like before. The display changed to a grouping of 15 species. Lars sighed in frustration. "None of these are even remotely close to what I saw," he groaned. He then dismissed the display in frustration. "Are you sure you saw humans?" asked Vlad. "I know what I saw, and you saw it too. Those guys who attacked us were almost definitely flesh and blood Homo sapiens. But they couldn't be, since we're the only humans in the entire galaxy." "I wouldn't be so sure of that. The old man said we weren't the first ones to step out into space, and from what we saw, I'm inclined to believe him." "I mean, if you think about it, he looked pretty human himself," said Lars. "If that's true, it creates a rather troubling problem for us. If we're not the first humans out here, then we could be catching flack for someone else's mischief," said Vlad. Lars pondered this briefly. "That's a possibility. However, if there are other humans who found their way out here before us, why haven't we heard about them by now? Or more curiously, why aren't they listed in any of the official galactic records?" asked Trent. Vlad shrugged. "Likely because they don't want to be seen, and don't want anyone to know they're out here. Given current hostilities towards Earth, I can understand why." Lars shook his head. No. It's got to be something else." Trent crossed his arms and furrowed his brow. "Then how do you explain the old man you spoke of?" Lars scratched his head slightly. "I'm not sure. But if you have some ideas, I'm open to hearing them." Trent licked his lips slightly. "Then allow me to proffer an idea. Since this old man you speak of is human, to the best of your understanding, then there exists a possibility that not only is he telling the truth, but there are also far more humans out here than a mere handful of specimens. Such as, perhaps, entire societies." Lars and Vlad both gave him a confused, surprised double take. "Wait, hold on a second. How can that be possible if mankind has been stuck in the virtual Stone Age since the dawn of time?" asked Lars. Trent furrowed his brow. "Given the evidence of other previously advanced societies in Earth's history, there is a very strong likelihood that, not only do one or more human societies exist out here among the stars, but they may have also gone to great lengths to hide their existence from those who remained behind on Earth, both prior to their leaving, and since then as well. Thus, we would know nothing about them, or their existence, as there would be no trace of them left behind on our homeworld of their ever existing. Or, if there was, it'd be very scant," he said. "Why would they go out of their way to hide their existence? There are 2 possibilities. Either they wish to hide their true origins from the rest of the galaxy, or they simply didn't want us to know they ever existed. Well, I can understand why they'd want to hide their origins from the societies of this galaxy. But why would they try to hide themselves from us? Asked Lars. Trent pursed his lips thoughtfully. They likely did so to protect Earth from someone who, at that time, was a threat to your homeworld. Thus, their erasing any evidence of Earth being their planet of origin would have done much to protect your ancestors from any danger that this group might have presented at the time. Lars thought about this for a moment, and then said, well, that theory is all fine and dandy, but wouldn't someone have figured that out by now? I mean, how do you hide someone like that without a random trader eventually learning the truth? All it'd take is one cargo jockey looking to make a buck to spoil the secret. Or the Andeans. They know everything, said Vlad. Lars nodded. Yeah, I'm definitely surprised they don't know. Trent cocked an eyebrow slightly. Just because the Andeans know most of the history of the galaxy does not mean they know everything. After all, look at the old man you encountered, as well as the men who attacked you. If both of their races were successfully able to keep their existences a well-guarded secret, even from the Andeans, it's possible that their presence within the galaxy is not officially known, and thus not in the records, said Trent. Right, but still, how do you hide an entire race without somebody finding out? I mean, even if nobody else discovered them, the Andeans sure would have because, if there's something out there to be found, they're pretty good at finding it. Perhaps they did it by hiding themselves in plain sight? I mean, if they don't look like they're trying to hide, it's only reasonable to assume that nobody would give them a second thought, or think they were trying to conceal something, said Trent. Vlad furrowed his brow. He has a point, he said. Wait, so are you saying that there's actually societies of humans out here, but they're so open about who they are that it's made them essentially invisible? Asked Lars. Trent cocked an eyebrow slightly. That is one theory. Even so, however improbable, that is currently the only viable explanation to our mystery at this point. Lars rubbed his chin in thought. I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me. What do you mean? Think about it. Any human society that would have stepped into space, regardless of when they did it, would have almost certainly stepped on someone's toes at some point given how little they'd have known about the other races at the time. Even if they did manage to not offend anyone, as soon as someone saw them, the entire galaxy would have known who they were, and that they were out here. I mean, remember the fuss we caused when we first wandered into space? Vlad laughed. Yeah, we caused quite the ruckus, didn't we? Yes, we did. So, that then begs another question. If these so-called humans are from Earth, who are they and how did they get out here? Said Lars. But nobody had an answer. Lars then stood there for several minutes, studying the dagger in great detail as it lay on the table in front of him while his mind processed all of the events of the previous day in a desperate search for clues. After some time an idea popped into his head that made him perk up. Wait a second. Maybe we're going about this the wrong way. I think the question we should ask ourselves is, what if the humans we encountered didn't come out here on their own, but were instead brought here against their will? Trent furrowed his brow. Are you perchance referring to alien abduction? He asked. Lars nodded. There's enough stories of that occurring throughout our history that I'm willing to consider it a possibility. Especially given our rather unwelcome encounter with the Juna shortly after we first stepped into space. That's indeed possible as there are several races who openly admit to abducting humans from Earth at one time or another to study them, despite laws forbidding such practices, said Vlad. Yeah, the Echigwa were bad about that. They still kinda are, replied Vlad. Yeah, tell me about it. So, with that in mind, let's take this a step further and assume that someone from Earth got abducted in the past. Given that we're likely dealing with two completely unique societies, and not simply a group of loosely knit individuals, it was either an entire village that they grabbed, or else they took a variety of disassociated individuals, studied them for a time, and then released them all in the same location. Assuming they were released, said Trent. Well, alright, then let's assume they were for the sake of the argument. If they weren't, we wouldn't likely be discussing this, said Lars. Fair enough. But then what? Well, since it's clear that what they did, whoever they were, was illegal, it's reasonable to assume that they wouldn't have returned their specimens to Earth because, if they did, someone would eventually figure out what had happened, and that's the last thing they'd want. But, at the same time, I don't think they'd want to kill the specimens either, as that'd make things worse, taking their crimes from simple abduction and illegal experimentation to genocide. Even the Ichigwa aren't that heartless. Sure, they're a little too curious for their own good, but they're not genocidal. As such, they likely took their abductees to somewhere that was Earth-like and far enough out of the way that nobody would know they did that, nor that the people they dropped off weren't native to that world. That means that, if my theory is correct, this dagger should match up to one of the ancient cultures of Earth. But wouldn't the culture of those abducted humans have changed significantly enough over time to make such clues impossible to detect? Lars shook his head. Not really. Some bit, piece, or fragment of every ancient civilization in the world still lives on in today's modern societies. For example, we still construct buildings using Greek and Roman-style architecture, and use systems, methods, and even bits and pieces of alphabets dating back as far as early Sumeria and ancient Egypt. Therefore, if this dagger does come from the descendants of an ancient human civilization abducted centuries or even millennia ago, it should still carry with it some identifiable similarities to known cultures and artifacts. So, if we search our own history, we might come up with an answer. Trent cocked his head briefly before finally nodding. That makes sense, oddly enough. Where would you like me to begin our search? Lars pursed his lips briefly, and then said, let's not limit ourselves to just one time frame. I think we should start by comparing this dagger to all known ancient Earth weaponry. Include all entries on file from modern to prehistoric time periods. Processing. I have found 14 possible weapons that closely match the design of the dagger, replied Trent. Are they all daggers? No. Then eliminate all entries that are not daggers. 9 entries remain, 2 of which very closely match the target subject. Show me the 2 closest matches and who created them. A holographic image appeared above the dagger showing 2 similar weapons, one Roman and one Celtiberian. Lars cocked his head in curiosity. What's the approximate time period of these weapons? The dagger on the left is of Roman design dating from approximately the 1st century BC. The one on the right is believed to have been in use by the Celtiberians during the period before Rome conquered them around the mid-3rd century BC, replied Trent. Lars studied the 2 weapons for several moments, and then said, all right, one more thing. Does this dagger match any known alien weaponry in your database? Insufficient data. Not all designs are known. However, of those that are, while there are many similarities, no one particular weapon currently matches this design. Lars picked up the dagger and studied it. He then looked at the 2 holographic daggers, before once again looking at the one in his hand. Vlad, my friend, this mystery just keeps getting weirder by the moment. Phylan stepped out of the Senate chambers and shook his head as though to clear it. Well, that was interesting, he said. What makes you say that? Asked Sin. For as long as I've been here, I've never had a day quite like that. Sin grinned. You mean the fighting on the floor? Yes, that was rather entertaining. Entertaining? Good Lord, those delegates nearly killed each other. Sin chuckled. I meant that facetiously. Ah, well, in that case I understand your humor. But still, I'm surprised it happened. Sin cocked an eyebrow in curiosity. Why do you say that? The UGW is divided within itself, and there are strong feelings coming from each of the factions. Yes, I know that. But for the Senate to devolve into such brutal carnage the way it did was unexpected. I know things get heated in there from time to time, but I've never seen it come to blows like that. Speaking of blows, your friend Finch seemed to be enjoying himself. How so? Asked Phyland. Did you not see what he did to the Ahoktak ambassador? Said Sin with a grin. Ah, yes, that. It sorta makes me jealous. I've been wanting to do that to him for the past 2 months. Sin laughed. I think many of us have, as was evidenced by the line of people waiting to punch him. Phylan chuckled. Yeah, I saw that. I almost considered taking a swipe at him myself. But, given the number that Finch did on his backside, I decided to bow out of that argument and take my pound of flesh on another day. Such is not necessary, as I have made right the soiling he has cast upon your nest. You need not darken your talons further, said Finch. Thank you, but you really didn't need to do that. I'm fully capable of taking care of myself. Sin snorted. That would be a galactic understatement, he quipped. We are Wingsanga. I had to act. To stand aside and allow a kindred wing to be disgraced is a dishonor to me, protested Finch. Phylan bowed slightly. And I am most honored by your kindness. However, it appears that your chivalry has resulted in a little, shall we say, soiling of your own colors? Finch studied him curiously for a moment until Phylan pointed at a rip on his cloak. Ah, I see what you mean. You need not fear that I was wounded in my zealousness. This is merely the result of an error I made while trying to get above the fray. I mistakenly flew too high and struck one of the lights on the ceiling, which tore my cloak. Ouch, grimaced Phylan. Finch smiled and waved a wing dismissively. It is nothing. Although my pride is wounded, it can be easily repaired. Sin grinned. I doubt we could say the same for the Ahaktak ambassador. He'll be a few days collecting all of his fur. In his teeth, quipped Phylan. The three men laughed. After a moment Phylan sighed, and said, well, all joking aside, do you think we made any progress today? Sin nodded. I believe we did. Given the fact that those who hate you started the brawl, it will do much to make them appear as the source of our problems, and not yourselves. In the end, I believe we will gain something beneficial from this. Perhaps even a resolution, however unlikely that may seem at this time. What kind of resolution? Asked Finch. One that ensures that Earth is protected, replied Sin. Hopefully we won't have to give up anything in the process, said Phylan. Sin shook his head. You won't if I have anything to say about it. A strong, stout man in a royal blue toga sat in a large, ornately decorated wooden chair on a stone pedestal in the middle of a large Roman-style atrium. Fountains of water trickled gently down intricately carved white marble statues of cherubs and bearded men with great swords and long flowing robes. In his right hand was a simple iron cup filled with a thick, dark red wine which he nursed gently as he pondered the events of the last several months. Licinius, his right-hand man and steward, strolled into the room and up to his chair. The prophet is here to see you, he said. The man took a sip of his wine, but said nothing. Philip, the prophet has important news for you, said Licinius more insistently. The man sighed. What news does he bring? He said with a hint of perturbation. He has come with word that the Chapachi and their allies are attempting to force the members of the UGW Senate to put aside their differences and instead seek to maintain the peace that has held the galaxy together for thousands of years. Philip's face erupted with an expression of fiery anger. He threw his cup across the room, leapt to his feet and glared at Licinius. Peace? I want no peace. Who dares attempt this blasphemy? He shouted. It is the Chapachi ambassador, said Licinius flatly. Then tell the prophet to summon an assassin. I want the Chapachi ambassador dead. He must not be allowed to live another day. Licinius bowed. As you wish, my lord, he replied. He then turned and hurried through the door as Philip sat down in his chair again and fumed angrily. How dare the Chapachi seek peace? There shall be no peace until they are dead, and every last star in this galaxy is mine, he said angrily to himself. Mike, Nordum, Corbin, Sarah and Bach stood outside receiving Dock 4 and watched as a small, agile, bird-shaped Fondo starship appeared around the perimeter of Pluto Station, and began its final approach. As it touched down, holographic avatars of Phylan and Finch appeared next to Mike and the others. Nordum looked over at the two ambassadors, and smiled. I'm glad you two could make it, he said. Phylan looked at him and nodded slightly. We can only be here for a short time, as I've got a meeting with the 7th in 20 minutes to help them strike a deal with the Foreign Trade Guild. Apparently they won't talk to each other directly, so they've asked me to be a mediator between them. Mike chuckled and shook his head. It's things like that which make me glad I'm in the military and not politics. Phylan snorted. There's days I wish I wasn't in politics either, he muttered. This made Mike grin. As he did, Phylan's image seemed to break up briefly, before stabilizing again. Sarah noticed this immediately. Is everything all right with your connection, Ambassador? She asked. What do you mean? Asked Phylan. Well, your avatar briefly lost cohesion. Phylan frowned slightly. Yeah, well, that's the fault of our transmitter array. It's not designed to make high-bandwidth holographic communications of this scale. Then why not get a bigger one? Asked Sarah. Well, normally I don't use this much bandwidth in my transmissions. So what we're doing right now is the exception, rather than the rule. As such, I can't justify having anything bigger. The only reason we're doing this in the first place is because Finch wanted to be here when the Fondo representatives arrived. And speaking of them, here they come now, said Corbin. The small group turned and looked toward the ship as 4 colorfully adorned Fondos stepped onto the deck, looked around briefly, and then began trotting towards Mike and the others. They soon stopped in front of Finch, and bowed, their wings splayed out in a gesture of respect. Finch bowed respectfully in return. The rookery sends winds of greetings, said one of the Fondos. In greetings I shall return, for I pray that great winds lift you up to sail among the clouds and fill your wings with gladness, replied Finch. The 4 Fondos then raised their heads, folded their wings, and looked curiously at the 6 humans that stood before them. I wish you great blessings of wind beneath your wings. My common name among those of the stars is Tails, said one of them. He then gestured to the other 3, and said, These, who stand before you, are my colleagues. Their common names are Falcon, Wind Whisper, and Sailor. We bring you greetings from the world of the Gfondona. We have come at the behest of our rookmate, the one you call Finch. There is great word among the currents that you may have found an answer to an elusive problem that has been plaguing us for many seasons. We just might, if all goes well. So we're glad to have you here at this momentous time in history. Hopefully, if everything works out, we'll be able to aid you in putting this issue you have to bed once and for all, said Bach. Your gesture of many feathers will be long remembered among our wings for nestings upon nestings to come, said Tails. Mike gestured to a nearby doorway, and said, If you would like to follow us, we'll show you to your quarters, and then introduce you to the others who'll be working with you to resolve this issue. Tails turned his attention to Mike, and looked at him curiously. Why are you, one who is of many talons, standing among those who wish to heal this failing of our wings? He asked. Mike smiled. I may be a military officer, but that doesn't preclude me from helping you in any way I can. Besides, you're our guests, and as such, we want to ensure that you're well taken care of while you're here. Plus I'm just as eager as the others to see you find a solution to your problem. Tails, and the other 3 Fondos, looked over at Finch curiously. Finch nodded. Of true feather he is. Even though he is of many talons, he is also of much down, kind feather, and wise beak, he said. Tails cocked his head slightly, and soon looked back at Mike. Then we will go where your winds lead us. And with that they all turned and followed Mike out of the room, save for Nordum, Phyland, and Finch. Nordum turned to Finch and bowed slightly. I appreciate you coming here to help make our initial greeting of your friends go so smoothly, he said. Finch gestured respectfully with his wings. When 2 strange wings come together, it is wise to have one of common feather to unite them as one. For you, I am that common feather. Therefore, you will find that, while you are still unfamiliar with each other, they will be far more trusting of you now than were they to be, had I not come. Nordum smiled. Thanks. I truly appreciate it. Finch curtsied slightly. You are welcome.